So it's 10:45, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Good morning. My name is Katie Miller. I'm the Student Success Textbook Affordability Librarian for the University of Central Florida.
My name is Sarah Duff. I'm the Acquisitions and Collection Assessment Librarian, also at UCF.
I'm going to do the background, so I'm going to go ahead and stand up. Good morning. So I am, let's see if this works. Yes, Penny Biley, Associate Director of Libraries for Research, Education, and Engagement, what we used to call public services in the old days. It's great to see so many faces that are familiar and friendly, so thank you for that. Before we get into the program, we wanted to see who you were, and so we might be able to customize a little bit depending on your interests. By show of hands, how many of you are librarians? It is a librarian conference, right? Okay. How many of you are associated with a publishing house? Oh, quite a few. Okay, great. Anybody else? Who else comes to this? What do you do? Okay, good. Well, welcome. Thank you very much. Now, another one on the flip side of that, how many of you are directly or indirectly involved with textbook affordability efforts? Great. And those of you who aren't, I guess you're interested? That's what this is about today, okay? Well, thank you all again for joining us. So my part of the session is the background, and our session describes one very successful component of an overall textbook affordability program. I can say that moving to this stage was a very conscious and intentional undertaking, and it's been exceptionally rewarding by any standard you want to use. Cost savings collected for institutional reports, collaborations with campus academic support units, working closely with faculty to increase student success, demonstrating return on investment for library collections, and most importantly, making college education a little bit more affordable and accessible for our students. So first, a little bit about UCF. A few of you have been there or worked there, so I recognize those faces. And if you know anything about UCF, you know that we're in Orlando and we're big, 68,000 students big. We also have been characterized as a university of access. We have a direct pipeline from a number of state colleges where when a student gets their associate's degree, they are automatically accepted at UCF. The majority of our students are transfers. Over 50% hold minority status. Over 25% are Hispanic, thus allowing us to be recognized as a Hispanic-serving institution, and almost a quarter are first-generation college students. Finally, 72% receive some form of financial aid. It's important to understand that transfer, first-gen, minority, and lower-income students may not have the means or support necessary to successfully navigate higher education. And while we can't remove all barriers or obstacles to their success, expensive textbooks is one thing that we can all work on. So as we know, textbooks cost, sometimes a lot. The problem is that textbook costs have doubled over the past 20 years, even when controlling for a 55% inflation rate. Data for this chart were compiled by economist Barry Ritholtz, who used Bureau of Labor Statistics, to show how over time some consumer goods have become more affordable, like TVs, software, and cell phone service. Not cell phones for some reason, though. I just bought one of those. They're like more expensive than ever. While others, such as medical costs and tuition and college textbooks, have grown increasingly expensive. Our most expensive textbook this semester is $426. Last semester, we had a textbook that cost over $700. As you can see, some publishers have effectively priced textbooks out of the market for many students. So how do we know this? Because we ask. Based on results of a statewide survey, the FLVC Student Textbook and Course Materials Survey that a lot of people are familiar with, we were able to disaggregate UCF responses, and we found that over half of UCF students reported they had not purchased a textbook due to cost. Our own local research revealed that 83% of students said that they had delayed purchase of textbook due to cost, and not having access to affordable textbooks may lead to poor grades and other negative academic outcomes and behaviors. And you can see those down there, not registering for a course, taking fewer courses, etc. Now the flip side of that is the promise of affordable textbooks. This is where students have access to course materials from day one, and it's been correlated to any number of student success metrics, including higher GPAs, taking more credit hours and therefore graduating earlier, and lower student debt. We just completed a grant cycle where we received funding for 5 faculty to create 4 open works. At the end of the grant, we had a showcase to celebrate the accomplishment, and the grants faculty discussed the process, outcomes, and use of the open textbooks they had created. Two of them remarked during the showcase that their students were more engaged and engaging more with the text, thus leading them to wonder if it was because they got it. Well, you certainly can't engage with it if you don't have it, right? The textbook. Now, this slide drove my co-presenters absolutely crazy. Like, can you redo this? And if you're a librarian, you know, and you like Boolean, you might be happy. There was way too much text on here, so let me explain a little bit. And what it represents are the three main drivers at the institution: our bid for preeminence at the top, performance funding at the right, all state university system, in the Florida State University system, all the universities vie for performance funding. I went doing an article on this. 37 states have performance funding metrics, so it's not uncommon if you're not in Florida to still see this. And then we also have the collective impact strategic plan on the left. There are unique performance indicators for each initiative, like the number of National Academy members for preeminence, the emphasis on developing economic partnerships within the community for the strategic plan, and median wages of graduates for performance funding. And there are overlaps. If you look at the white text right in the middle, student success metrics reside at the intersection of all three of these institutional drivers, and they are all supported by a strong textbook affordability program. So the point of this slide is to suggest, if you're interested in doing something like this, that you conduct your own scan to determine the state climate and institutional priorities, and then map your efforts to those goals. And once you have them, relate your accomplishments back to those goals. We told our story at a lot of different venues to a variety of audiences, customizing the narrative to each stakeholder. For example, the Institutional Effectiveness Unit was most interested in how the initiative is contributing to reducing the cost of college for performance funding reports. The Vice President over Student Success wants to know how access to affordable textbooks impacts student GPA and persistence. And then there are the students themselves who just want to know how to access affordable textbooks. We disseminated results widely and gained a lot of interest from across the institution. A few places are noted on the slide, but I want to focus on the last one, which is the Student Success Investment Model. The investment model was created by the provost with a $1 million pot of money, and ostensibly, of course, to support student success. While colleges rely heavily on funding from student credit hours, campus academic support units do not have access to those types of funds. Therefore, the people who don't have student credit hours funding were the ones who were invited to participate in this investment model. Initially, the library was not even at the table, but when several vice presidents found out about our textbook affordability efforts, we were invited to submit a proposal, followed by a presentation to everyone on the board. I guess I drew the short straw. This was me, and it was one of the most intimidating sessions I've ever attended, much less had to present at. So essentially there are 12 vice presidents and vice provosts, and like, I want 20 more advisors, and I want to purchase this, and this kind of thing. And we arm wrestled, over what was essentially a very limited pot of money, and I can state unequivocally that it was the metrics that we had collected and how we were able to tie them back to the potential to impact student success and institutional goals that we were funded for a dedicated textbook affordability position. That was late last year, and from that, the library hired Katie Miller as its first textbook affordability librarian, and Katie will describe her role and more about the actual project.
Thank you, Penny. So there's a brand new job, didn't exist before. How do I do it? So I have a job description, but we all know a job description doesn't really tell us how we do our jobs on a daily basis. Another challenge that I have is that textbook affordability efforts had been at the university since 2016 by a number of people. So I had sort of these bits and pieces, and that's where that jigsaw puzzle theme comes in. I had to take all these pieces of other people's jobs and figure out how are we going to weave them together so that it makes sense and it has a clear picture. So I used three different approaches to achieve that goal. The first one was doing a landscape survey. I was new to the institution and I just wanted to know what was happening. So, do a little digging there. Next, I needed to establish a workflow. How, as Penny mentioned, UCF is big. How are we going to manage so many students, so many faculty? and documenting it so that also, again, this is something that is tracked by our university. We need to be transparent. We need to say this is how we came to this particular number. This is what our outreach efforts look like. So we're not stopping the tracking just because we got the funding for a position. We're continuing to do that, and that was a big part of my job. And then finally, once I sort of figure out what's going on, what am I going to do, then how can we grow the program? So coming to the landscape survey, as we all know, at an academic institution, culture is so important. There's a formal way that things are done, and then there's an informal way that things are done. So again, being new, I spent a lot of time just listening, learning, watching, trying to understand, how were meetings conducted, what was the workflow for different areas. After I sort of got my feet wet and had great guidance from my supervisor, Penny, then I met individually with our subject librarians. So the model that we created was that at UCF, the subject librarians are the primary liaison for their different disciplines. So how do I fit into that? So I met with each individual librarian and came up with sort of a customized approach, because as we all know, people do their jobs differently. Some people were really hands-on and wanted to be completely involved in the process, and other people had conflicting priorities, and they were like, nope, you do that, I'm so happy you're here. So really recognizing what was going to work best for each and every subject librarian. Then I met with our external partners. So this was an institutional-wide effort, and that included our Center for Distributed Learning, which helps instructors with instructional designers to help with Canvas, which is our learning management system, figuring out what is my role going to be, what is your role going to be, also meeting with faculty excellence, how can we all work collectively to support our faculty, but not have things be confusing. When do you direct someone to the right place? And so we came up with sort of 3 main areas of focus for the library, the first of which being assisting faculty with existing electronic resources like ebooks or journal articles to replace course materials. The second one being assisting faculty finding open educational resources that are available. And then the third one was the management of a print textbook reserve. So it was created before I came through Penny's efforts that we were able to get some funding and create a reserve collection for textbooks that were used for a number of our general education courses, so that students could come in, check out the book for 2 hours. At least there was some resource for the students who were unable to purchase a text. So after I sort of did this landscape survey, figured out how I was going to work with everyone else, the next step was, again, to document that workflow. And it's really important to recognize here how important scale is. So we're fortunate at the University of Central Florida. We have a positive relationship with our bookstore, and we get a copy of the textbook list. That being said, it is a spreadsheet that has thousands of entries. And I'm not kidding when I say the word thousands. And so I had to come up with a systematic approach for reaching out to these faculty, confirming what they were doing, and tracking how I reached out to them. So recognizing that this is a really high-touch endeavor. This isn't the mass email that you say, hey, what are you doing? And you just send it out and hope some people come back. Instead, what I did is I took the list and noted, okay, here's where I reached out to this person, and documented it. I also documented the steps for tracking. How did we calculate the savings? What did we do? Making sure that if anybody wanted to follow in our footsteps, they could just go to this guide and read through it and recreate the numbers that we came up with. So, and this is also helpful because it helped us revise and refine the process. So one of the lessons we learned along the way was that Sarah had a wonderful opportunity to purchase some ebooks through happenstance, and we were like, yay, great. So we compare it against the book list, we come up with the list of textbooks, we purchase the books, hurrah. We send out a note to the faculty saying, hey, guess what, your textbook is now available as an ebook. That was great for most of them, but there were some of them that were like, oh, I'm not using that book next term, sorry. So that's kind of an example of, okay, so next time I need to remember to check with the faculty first and ensure, that textbooks aren't static, they change all the time. And mentioning the number of faculty that I've reached out to, another thing I did was create a collection of email templates. So again, this is a systematic approach, it's high touch, but I'm talking to something like 400 faculty, so I can't remember what I said to someone last semester. So this is the third semester I've gone through the process. It gets a little smoother each time, and I keep the emails in an organized folder so that I can look back and say, oh, when I spoke with Instructor Jones, this is what they said. And it also helps because the customized email templates are targeted based on the situation. When you're introducing yourself to a new faculty member, almost like a cold call, it's going to look completely different than someone you've established a relationship with. So making sure that I had those targeted emails and I could look back and sort of refresh myself on where this particular faculty was in the process was incredibly helpful. And again, those relationships are going to be so critical. There were two examples that I'd like to share with you. The first one being, earlier I mentioned the opportunity to purchase some ebooks, yay. One thing I didn't take note of was who the author of that particular textbook was. Well, when we reached out to the faculty, he was the author. And he had concerns that we were giving away his book for free through the library instead of selling it. So luckily, I had a great partnership with the subject librarian. She had a relationship with this faculty member, so we were able to sort of smooth that one over a little bit and let him know, no, this is not a copyright violation, this is a common practice, and here's why we're within copyright guidelines. So that subject librarian relationship was critical to managing that situation, and it was also something that I needed to note for future outreach efforts. Okay, check the name of the author, check with the, sort of get the lay of the land before you reach out to this person. And then another example was a faculty member that I reached out to, and he wrote me back a very long and interesting email and asked me, did I actually work for the university? He was concerned I was not who I was representing myself as. Was I trying to sell him a textbook as a vendor? And I had copied the subject librarian on the email chain, and he put at the bottom, if you hadn't copied this subject librarian, I wouldn't even be talking to you right now. So thankfully, the subject librarian chimes in and says, yes, she actually works for the university, it's true, and his complete demeanor and tone changed, and now he's a wonderful advocate for textbook affordability. So just noticing, that climate and those relationships are critical. And then finally, looking outside of the library a little bit, I also worked with different areas that you might not think of as a traditional partnership. Under my student success hat, I had a relationship with the Office of Student Success, and we were able to write and receive an $8,000 grant, and this allowed us to fund more print books for our print textbook reserve. We wanted to target those general education courses, the ones that we had tried to target earlier. We couldn't get enough funding the first time, so we're really excited about that. And then it sort of changed into a different model because when I went through and compared the books that were actually being used, I found that we could only spend about half of the funding because so many instructors required an access code as a part of their course materials. So we put our heads together and we created a scholarship for students with the remaining funds, and we created kind of an interesting application process with that. So if a student is at risk, they contact the office that handles at-risk students at the university. They fill out an application, and part of that application is reaching out to me and saying, hey, do you have any library resources that I can use for my course materials? I look through that, and if I notice that there's an ebook that maybe we wouldn't have purchased before because it's rather pricey, then we can use grant fundings to purchase the book and support that student. So instead of just buying a one-off for the student that serves them for that single semester, we're able to spend a little bit more money, capitalize on that, and then have something for future students in future terms. And so another area that has turned into a great partnership is our Student Government Association. This is something that, again, kind of happened through happenstance, and they have partnered with us in a number of different ways. First, they've reached out to our food bank and they co-sponsor a textbook donation drive, so we're able to get print textbooks from students after the semester's over, so that's something that they've done. They've also provided us with promotional materials to pass out during library events, and another way that they've assisted us is they will push out library events through their own social media. So it's not just the library who's reaching out to students, it's the Student Government Association that's tapped in. So it's students telling other students. So sometimes it's interesting to sort of see where those unexpected partnerships might happen. And of course, one of the most critical partnerships is an internal partnership. Sarah has been an amazing collaborator in this because she allows me to really focus on finding the materials and then ensuring the faculty are actually going to use them. And then I can, after I find something that I think is a possibility, I can send it to her for vetting to make sure all those pesky DRM rights and usage rights are going to work for that particular class. Another reason that it's wonderful to have this partnership is because she's another set of eyes. And one of the things that she's done this semester is she noticed a book that was being used heavily. We didn't have it flagged as a course textbook, but when she asked, we confirmed it was. This semester alone, we were able to have 143 students served, and it had a potential savings of over $6,400. So I'm going to let Sarah tell you a little bit more about that story.
So yes, so this was one book that I discovered during my normal acquisitions, maintenance, essentially. I was checking on our ProQuest nonlinear titles and seeing, okay, well, which ones are getting heavy use that I might have to upgrade, and noticed this particular title and thought, well, this is getting a lot more use than I would have expected. It is available for unlimited, so I pushed it over to Katie and said, will you please check the textbook list, find out if this is really being used as a textbook. Because we discovered the textbook website is not always accurate, so it's always good to double check.
Yes.
I think the list is not 100% accurate either, but it's pretty good. So she checked, she said yes. I checked the upgrade price and it was $15. $15, and then we reached 143 students with a potential savings for students of $6,400. So that is a no-brainer, right? That's very straightforward. Yes, I'm happy to spend $15 to reach all these students and get unlimited access. Well, it's not always so straightforward, unfortunately. And I think probably most of you are in our shoes in the sense that you have no dedicated funding for this. We have no new funding for textbook affordability within the materials budget. So how are we doing all this? How do you meet these needs without additional funding? It's pretty challenging. You really cannot get everything. You can't do it. I mean, first of all, not everything is suitable and not everything is available, but you don't have the funding. So you have to figure out how to make it work within what the library is already doing and already owns. So when deciding how to get a book, if we can get a book, I kind of distilled it into these 3 main points. So, can we even buy it? What DRM and user models are there for what we already have in the collection? And how much does it cost and who's paying for it? So availability and ownership is probably the most important point, because if they won't sell it to us, we cannot buy it. And if we have access, how do we have access? So this sounds very straightforward, right? Either you have it or you don't. But UCF is complicated. We're very complex. We acquire ebooks pretty much every way you could acquire ebooks. We have historic consortial purchases that happened, at the dawn of ebooks that have a wide variety of issues and DRM licenses. We have an ebook subscription package through a consortium, which is not managed by UCF, so I don't always know what's happening with that. And titles do get dropped from that, so it's not perpetual, it's a subscription. We have EBA programs. We currently have 3 evidence-based programs going. So again, those are not going to be perpetual. The program will end, we will make our selections, and then some of them will cease to exist in UCF. And then, of course, we have ebook packages that we purchase every year, year after year. We have, firm orders title by title that we do as well. So then we look at who's paying for it. So UCF has a medical school. The medical school is separate. The medical school is its own accounting unit. It's on a different campus. We can't just stop in and say, hey, what are you guys doing with this? So some of our textbooks that we identified on the textbook list that we have access to are in a medical school database. Now, the non-med school students can access them, but we don't know what's going on with that database, if it's in danger of being dropped. We don't know. We really have to talk to the med school librarians. Communication is really key to find out what's happening with the titles in this database. Can you give us a little overview? And that the Access Medicine database, I don't think is in danger of being dropped, but you truly never know. And the titles, again, are not perpetual, so it's important to communicate back and forth and see what happens with those titles when a new edition comes out. The instructors may be using a previous edition trying to save their students money. Well, that previous edition may not be available in the database anymore. So it takes a lot of communication to explain across the board. And then, of course, you want to look at if it's stable. Some of these platforms do sometimes have issues. If a platform goes down, we need to be able to communicate that to faculty who have textbooks on that platform that they're pushing out to their students. And in acquisitions and in new resources, we're sending that out to subject librarians, we're sending that out to reference librarians, but then someone needs to kind of think, oh, we have a lot of textbooks on that platform, we need to start notifying people that there was an outage, your students are not making it up when they say they couldn't access it this weekend. So those are all important to note. Then, of course, the DRM and user models are highly important. In a lot of cases, nonlinear or concurrent model, which has a limited number of uses per year, in some cases that's great, and that works great as a textbook. But if you have 500 students in a course and you have 365 uses or 325 uses or 200 uses, it's probably not going to cut it. So if it's available to upgrade to unlimited, that might be your option. If it's not, you might have to get creative. So in some cases, we've purchased a single user copy and a nonlinear or concurrent. And the nonlinear concurrent uses don't kick in unless the single user is already in use. So it kind of helps mitigate it a little bit. But you do have to be watchful. You do need to run your reports, look at your reports, and see, because sometimes, students love to do their work at 2 a.m. And I did have a book that had I think 100 uses left, and 75 of them just went overnight. I came into just a raft of emails about how my uses were low, and it can get a little dicey, especially toward the end of the semester when everyone is doing everything that they put off. Of course, DRM free is always going to be what you want, but not everything is available DRM free. And then it's important to note the usability of the platform. Not all platforms are created equal, and some of them work very differently than others, so it may be worth it to try to get a subject librarian, if you can, in front of the class to just show them, this is how you get to your textbook, this is how you download, because it's not always intuitive, it's not always clear. And you will find yourself, no matter how well you understand DRM and user models and publisher restrictions on an ebook, you will find yourself having to explain it over and over and over because your faculty will not understand. I heard several times from faculty who say, well, you said it was unlimited, but my students checked it out and it says they only have it for 21 days. Well, yes, it's not DRM free. So if they're checking it out, it does have a time limit, and then they'll have to go in and check it out again. But it will always be there. It's unlimited users, but it still has a DRM. So you will find yourself explaining that quite a bit. So just know that going in. And of course, price and funding. As I said, we do not have funding dedicated to this. So we are looking at the books that we already are purchasing from our ebook packages, or looking at making our selections from our evidence-based programs and taking textbook affordability into account when we do that. But I see yourself thinking like, well, okay, but won't you know from the usage? Why do you have to communicate? Why do I have to bug Katie to ask her? Well, if I'm making my selections in April, when the program ends, and a faculty member has noticed it in March, but is assigning it in the summer, it's not going to have usage yet, right? So it's really important to give Katie work and make her dig through the textbook list and look at the publishers and send me a list, and then communicate with faculty and make sure this is something that is going to be assigned again, so that we're not getting something that, you know, was used heavily and then won't be used again. But for titles that we're buying on a title-by-title firm order basis, the subject librarians are paying for out of their allocations. So that can be pretty tricky, because you don't want a subject librarian to use their whole allocation just for a few textbooks. It will go really fast. So it's important, if you're going to do something like this, to communicate with your subject librarians and with everyone who's doing collection development, and have a policy in place, because they can feel pressured, like they have to spend all their money on this, or they can feel, you know, they can feel like maybe they're not doing enough if they're not really getting on board. But some of these textbooks can be, you know, $500, $700 for an ebook. Well, that's probably not a good fit for this program, because that's a big chunk of change for one course. So it's important to look and see, would this fit? Is this something that we would purchase anyway? Does this fit in the scope of the library's collection?
I thought it was coming from
No.
Thank you for that lovely cue that we need to move on to close out the presentation. It is very much appreciated. So I hope you've been able to envision a little bit about how complicated this process can be, how it is really like a jigsaw puzzle. You do have to find how to fit all these pieces together. And it does take a little bit of effort, but we really feel like collectively it's worth it. And one of the reasons we feel so strongly is that since 2016, we've been able to potentially save students over $2.5 million. And so we hope that what we've shared with you might help you envision your own picture for the puzzle at your own institution. And at this point, we welcome any questions that you have. Just walk up to the mic and let us know. We were directed by the conference presenters to please ask people to come to the mic.
It's being recorded. Like the way.
So my question is, for the textbook book that you're looking at, are you basing it off of your purchases, basing them off of the threshold that you're reaching? Like, that textbook is $200, and so because it's $200, then we're going to consider buying it for the library in order to make it affordable for students, or are you doing it for all textbooks, no matter?
It depends. So let me explain why it depends, and Sarah touched on this a little bit. We may buy a $200 book that serves a class of 500 and runs 10 sections. We may be less likely to purchase a book that costs $200. That's a graduate level course that has 20 students and is offered once a year. So, and it also depends on the philosophy of the subject librarian. They may need, again, we don't have any funding for this. So it really is collaborating very closely with the subject librarians, seeing what kind of budget they have. Thankfully, this semester, or this academic year, we have the grant funding as a buffer to help. That goes through we have a grant leadership team, and we check and we kind of talk about, does this make sense? And then we would kick it out to the actual faculty member and their department and say, we would love to buy this book. It's a little bit out of our price range right now. Would your department consider picking it up or splitting the cost? So it looks a lot of different ways. Every single textbook opportunity is done on a case-by-case basis. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
Oh.
Yes. We have more e-resources. And one of the things, again, that's that scale issue. So I know a lot of institutions, they're trying to get people, like they're able to connect more easily with their faculty. Just by sheer numbers, and me being new to this role, we're attacking sort of the easy win. So we have sort of the scaffold approach for faculty when I meet with them. So it's like, you could do this, You could just replace your materials with library source materials, and maybe we already have your textbook available. So that's kind of like the easy no-brainer, right? You just switch out the link in the syllabus. But maybe we don't, and you have to investigate some different resources. And maybe you want to build your own open educational resource book or adopt an open educational resource book. That sort of kicks up the continuum on time and effort. So we make sure that we say, hey, what's right for you right now this semester? Because maybe it's not right this semester because the faculty member doesn't have time, but it may be something in the future. And that's where keeping that documentation of like, Professor Edwards really wants to do something for her Mesopotamian history course, but she can't do it this term. She really wants to think about it in the spring. Well, then I can make a little mental note. Okay, I need to reach out to that instructor. Does that answer your question? And what's your second one? Thank you.
I want to insert a small comment here. At the end of that faculty showcase, and we received funding from a state grant, Complete Florida, for our faculty to create OER. At the end of it, interim vice provost pulled us aside and said, I just got funding for TA from the provost, $30,000 a year for the next 2 years. So again, we're seeing this really leverage up to the institution. But now, and she said, I feel strongly that if we can show some return on this investment, we will get a lot more whenever the $30,000 expires. So we're moving there too.
Yeah, our print textbook reserve gets huge volume. So we just can't get enough, faculty are moving away from a print textbook model to an because we have so many online classes, and it just sort of seems to be the way people are going. So, yes.
Hi, I have a comment first. At our university, our provost has taken this on, and along with registration, has marked all the classes that have these textbooks in them, so that students will know to go to those classes if they have a choice. So that's really been helpful in that situation. But one question that I had, you mentioned having 5 faculty members who completed OER textbooks for their classes. That has been such a struggle for us at our university, trying to create interest in it and sustain interest in that. And I'm wondering whether you or anybody has had a great deal of luck with that, or whether that's, it just feels like we're pushing against the wrong wall there.
I'll take a quick stab, and Lois said anybody else who's got comments on that too. So when we first started in 2016, we did a lot of presentations. We worked very collaboratively with our instructional designers and promoted OER, especially OpenStax, and we had a lot of people take it. And then we would find that a lot of people didn't have one-on-one replacements that they could adopt. So we worked with an English Lit faculty member and kind of broke open the Norton Anthology of Medieval Literature. It took 3 months of huge work with our copyright scholarly communication librarian, with 2 of the subject faculty who support that, with the instructional designers actually rekeyed in all of this stuff that we could find open. And it was a lot of work. And it's like, with 2,000 faculty and 68,000 students, we said, this is not sustainable. We can't do this. So we were really glad to get that grant, because it put the burden on the faculty, and then we were very much a support role. I forgot the whole question.
Okay. And also to kind of build, I think that's why it's so critical that we sort of have this where are you now faculty. You have to meet faculty where they are. And so by providing, just think about textbook affordability, time is not right, that's fine. Just kind of let them marinate on it a little while. And I have been very pleased with how many say it's not right now, but then they kind of circle back a little bit later. Or, suddenly their friend did it and now they're interested. But like that simple step of a syllabus review is one of the approaches that we've taken, where I'm just like, send me your syllabus, because maybe I can look at your learning outcomes and see if there's some materials. Maybe we can just do some supplemental stuff to start, and then, you know, build upon it. But you really do have to recognize, like, I was a teaching faculty prior to joining UCF for 5 years, so I get it. You know, they're overburdened, there's a lot going on, and if you don't hit them when they're ready to do it, it's just not going to happen.
And I remember my final comment, and that was that incentivize. They're incredibly busy, as Katie just said, so we paid $5,000 to create their textbook. They had the option of a course release, and every single faculty member took the money and ran. We're getting close to the end. If anybody wants to hang out afterwards, we're passionate about this, and thank you all very much for coming. And if you've got more questions, we're happy to entertain them, but we probably need to let the next people set up. Thank you very much.
Thank you.